very different from China. The Chinese paid little attention to God, spirits, and religion. India seemed to embrace the idea of the divine with loads of enthusiasm. Now, when we think of India, the first religion that typically comes to mind is Hinduism. And Hinduism is a unique religion in the sense that there isn't one person who can be credited as being the historical founder. Even the concept of quote-unquote Hinduism was imposed by outsiders who were looking at India's belief system and trying to determine a coherent system to make sense of it. The historical roots of Hinduism can be traced to the Vedas, which was a collection of songs and poems brought to India by the Aryans. And the Vedas tells the story of Indian civilization from the years 1500 to 600 BCE. During this time, India was fragmented into small competing states. There were many gods and elaborate rituals designed to appease these gods. Now, inherent in Hinduism is the notion of a caste system, and the caste system prescribes a strict social hierarchy. At the top of the caste system are Brahmins, who are priests and scholars. After the Brahmins come Kshatriya, who are warriors. After came the Vaishya, who are farmers and merchants. Following came the Sudras, who are slaves. At the bottom of society was a group known as the Untouchables, who did work that was considered unclean. So the caste system was based on concepts of purity and pollution. Jobs are ranked because purity is associated with those who work with their minds, and pollution is associated with those who come in contact with polluted things like sweat or excrement or dead bodies. To ensure purity, people had to marry members of their own caste. The Brahmins were at the top of the social hierarchy, and they wielded extreme power in ancient Indian society. But the Brahmins were also criticized for abusing their power. They often demanded outrageous fees to perform rituals. So it was out of dissatisfaction towards Brahmins that another holy text was created, known as the Upanishads. And it's from this text where a lot of the most important ideas of Hinduism originate. At the most basic level, Hindus believe that they have a dharma, or duty, to perform in life. If all follow their dharma, the world works smoothly. Only when one violates their dharma do things fall out of whack. When one follows their dharma, they'll get good karma. And the idea of reincarnation is important to Hinduism. Hindus refer to this concept of reincarnation as samsara. When you die, your soul is born again in another body. And this is really the origin of the idea of karma. If you lived a good life, you would be reincarnated into a higher caste. If you lived a bad life, you would be reincarnated into a lower caste. This religion justified the inequality that was in the caste system. Basically, the caste system was an indication of how spiritually developed you were. The ultimate goal for Hindus and Hinduism was to reach moksha, which was oneness with the universe, and only when one reaches moksha will the endless cycle of death and rebirth end. In India, another major religion emerged as a challenge to some of the ideas in Hinduism. The founder of this religion was Siddhartha Gautama, and he was a prince from a small kingdom in northern India. Gautama grew up in the lap of luxury. He was a happy child that had everything he wanted, but he was really disturbed when he grew up and learned of some of the problems in the world, or some of the problems in Indian society, things like war and sickness and poverty and starvation. So Siddhartha Gautama left home and his fortune behind, his title behind, and embarked on a 6-year spiritual quest when he was 29 years old. After his quest, Gautama believed he had achieved enlightenment, and Siddhartha taught followers his ideas for 40 years, and his followers came to see him as the enlightened one, or the Buddha. So, central to his teaching was the idea that there are 4 noble truths in the world. All life is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. There is a way out of suffering, and the way out of suffering is to follow the Buddha's teaching, which he termed the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Paths were things you needed to do in your life to eliminate desires. So The Buddha taught that suffering was the central theme of human life. Human suffering is caused by desiring things, material things, sexual things, by one's ego, and the key to happiness was to cease desiring, to live modestly, and to meditate. By completely letting go of desires, one could achieve nirvana, a state where individual identity, along with greed, hatred, and delusion, would disappear. And in the midst of this serenity, the enlightened one would be filled with love and compassion for all living things in nature. A lot of what the Buddha taught was based on Hindu teachings. Ordinary life is just an illusion, the concept of karma, the concept of reincarnation, and the idea that when one achieved enlightenment, they would be released from the cycle of birth and death. But other aspects of Buddhism rejected Hindu traditions. Buddhists didn't recognize Brahmins. They were opposed to the rituals that Hinduism seemed to have a lot of. Buddhism saw this as being completely irrelevant to the task at hand, which was dealing with one's suffering through the elimination of desire. And other aspects of Buddhist teachings really rejected what Hinduism taught. Buddhism taught that people had to take responsibility for their own spiritual development without help from human authorities such as Brahmins or supernatural beings such as gods. The Buddha didn't view himself as being divine. He was simply a regular person who followed the right path towards enlightenment. Perhaps most significantly, Buddhism challenged inequalities that were apparent in Hindu-based caste system, and Buddhism argued that neither caste or gender was a barrier to becoming an enlightened person. Gradually, Buddhist teaching found an audience in India. Its message of equality appealed especially to women and lower caste people. The most dedicated followers joined monasteries, devoting their lives to religious practice and spreading the message among nearby peoples.